Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. As we're set to deliberate the latest developments here in the Middle East, throughout Israel, the region, and beyond, with also chief focus, especially today, November 5th, on the U.S. elections, it's always important to remember how the war that is currently raging in the Middle East began. 396 days ago, on October 7th of last year, the Islamist Hamas and its affiliates in the Gaza Strip launched a surprise onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping 250 people approximately, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 101 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. The subsequent day, on October 8th of last year, Iran essentially joined that war when it greenlighted its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, to launch cross-border attacks against Israel. Since then, this Iranian proxy has launched over 12,000 projectiles towards Israeli territory, and not Hezbollah alone. Additional Iranian proxies, be they the Houthis in Yemen, Hashd al-Shaabi in Iraq, or other Shiite militias in Syria, have also joined the fight, including Iran proper, which is yet again threatening to launch another wave into Israeli territory. Let's now turn to central Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the head of intelligence at Mossad, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. General Sofrin, I'd like to hear your perspective on the current state of play. It seems that the Iranians, on the one hand, are spouting out rhetoric of intentions to strike at Israel. Nevertheless, they remain very cautiously calculating the various changes currently in the Middle East.
They're very understood, and I'll tell you why. First of all, they're threatening because they need to do that in order to what we call to save face, and not to prove that Israel is upper than them and can beat them anytime they choose. Second, they know that they are exposed because of the fact that their anti-aircraft batteries are most of them are demolished. That means that Iran's skies and its nuclear facilities and other very important facilities are exposed to Israeli attacks that hasn't been carried out yet, not for this round, and it can be for the next phase. The third thing is that they know that they don't have the capability to produce new ballistic missiles, and therefore they have to calculate very carefully how to react. That means, on one hand, they want to take an action in order to pay back Israel, and not to prove to the Arab world and the Middle East as a whole that Iran is deterred, that Iran is weak, and Iran cannot protect itself and cannot pay back on Israel on one hand. On the second hand, they need to understand that if they're going to retaliate, Israel is going to strike very and cause very much damage to what we call critical infrastructures. And therefore, they now have to choose what kind of, first of all, what kind of course of action are they going to take? And the second one is it going to be only from the Iranian soil? Because we have rumors that they removed ballistic missiles and kamikaze UAVs and all other facilities to Iraq as well to be activated by the Hashd al-Shaabi militias from Iraq soil, and therefore to create some what we call a mess on our defense capabilities and to try to penetrate and to cause some damage in Israel.
Indeed. Well, let's turn to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, formerly an Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to immediately ask you, particularly about the new posture in the Middle East. We see Star Hoppers or the B-52s specifically being diverted here into CENTCOM area of responsibility. We're hearing about U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin greenlighting additional squadrons into the region, additional naval assets into the region, ahead of a anticipated withdrawal from the USS Abraham Lincoln Strike Group.
I think it's also the fact that there was a direct threat that came from Khamenei against not only Israel, but also against the United States, threatening a, quote, crushing blow against the United States. So I think in an abundance of caution to cover the Abraham Lincoln and what could be considered a ridiculous but still realistic threat on the part of Khamenei, could very well be that the Department of Defense brought in additional assets, not simply to protect Israel, but also to protect American facilities, troops, and infrastructure that we have around the region.
Thank you, General. Let's now turn also to Central Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Cooper-Wasser, formerly the Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, as well as the head of the Research and Assessment Division at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to hear your 2 cents on this matter. Obviously, as General Sofrin mentioned, Iran, according to a number of rumors, but also statements, does not only intend to launch an attack against Israel, but will not thwart and possibly even direct its own proxies from joining the attack from Iraq, Yemen, and elsewhere.
Well, as General Sofrin said, the Iranians are in a very problematic situation. And it's beyond the issue of whether to retaliate or not. The problem is that Israel is posing a threat to the entire strategy of Iran of building a ring of fire around Israel and becoming the hegemon power in the Middle East. Because if this war ends the way Israel wants it to end, and Israel has managed to gain a lot of progress, to make a lot of progress towards winning the war, then the entire project of the Iranian revolution is going to fall apart. And that's what's at stake. And yes, they still have some assets. They're not, we have managed to cause them a lot of damage, but they still have some assets, just like, for example, the 101 hostages in the hands of Hamas, the redundancy of rockets in the hands of Hezbollah and in the hands of the Houthis. They still control the Khash al-Sha'bi in Iraq. They still have assets that they can use in order to fight back, and they still have a lot of missiles in their hands. Even if they cannot produce new solid fuel propelled missiles, they still have a lot of missiles in their hands right now. But they are exposed, they are vulnerable. It was proven that they are vulnerable. It was proven that they are much weaker than what they would like to consider themselves to be. It was proven that the proxies cannot really bring about the demise of Israel, and it's a very problematic situation for them. And much is going to be decided. They decided already to postpone any retaliation until the elections in the United States, and much is going to be affected by the results of the elections in the United States. They're waiting to see the results like everybody else, and I think that's going to have an impact on the decision whether to carry out a counterattack or not.
Indeed. Well, one of the most important points that I think should be highlighted, Israel's strike on the propellant component, the production site of propellant fuels in Iran for ballistic missiles, has forced Iran to conduct a certain recalibration into a mindset of ammo discipline. They're not able to just launch as much as they want, knowing that it will take them some time in order to rehabilitate their capacity to produce its most potent weaponry. Of course, it can utilize the drones or UAVs and cruise missiles, but these have not proven to be as effective in their campaign against Israel. But I'd like to ask our next panelist. We'll turn now to Central Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Yaron Rosen, formerly the IDF chief of cyber staff, as well as a Israel Air Force commander and a fighter pilot. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to ask you, there were a couple of reports regarding Iran's radar systems being targeted by a cybersecurity breach that have crippled its capacity of seeing anything, be it incoming military or civilian aircraft, for that matter, for roughly 72 hours. I don't know what's the state of functionality of that system at this moment in time. Nevertheless, what can you tell us about that, and to what degree should the Iranians fear Israel's believed to be very potent cyber capabilities?
Well, I think everything is possible. We've seen beeper attacks and communications attack and all these very sophisticated attacks. So supply chain attack can go from civilian or semi-civilian sort of used by the military equipment, whatever it is. And it can go all the way to a direct attack, a cyber attack on the radars or anything around the air defense area. But I think we also saw an attack, a physical attack. One of the satellite images that I saw was a physical attack in one of the big radars. And you have to consider also that we're using also F-35. So some of the stories that were being told or that are going around are just because these radars maybe cannot see these aircraft. And that's the upper hand that Israel has in this struggle. But I think that what we're seeing, basically, again, going to some of my friends' comments, I think the paper tiger is roaring. We should not be negligent of the capabilities of this paper tiger that is very exposed. The Iranian calculus now may be turned into a gambler's choice. They are in some part of their strategy. They may feel that they're losing everything, as explained previously, and that might lead to some actions that we can be actually very, very surprised from. So we need to be very, very cautious, and add to that the fact that we are sort of in the twilight zone between the U.S. administrations, and this is something that we should be looking out for.
I think, as everybody just mentioned, the U.S. election today is going to impact Iranian calculus, Israel's calculus for that matter, but everybody around the region is looking very closely at what is happening right now in the United States of America, irrespective of the fact that the Biden administration will continue to rule in Washington until January 20th of next year. But General Soflin, I would like to actually draw our attention to another theater, namely the Horn of Africa, where we're seeing Egypt, Israel's western neighbor, deploying weaponry, munitions for a potential support in a prospective conflagration in Somalia versus Ethiopia, something that, of course, also the Russians and Iran specifically has a stake in. What should we take from this whole development over there, and to what degree could this further inflame, so to speak, the current volatile situation in the Middle East?
There are three different milestones. The first one is what we call the Egyptian involvement, or deepening the involvement and the support to Somalia. Now, in the northern part of Somalia, there is a place, it's called Somaliland, which is kind of an independent area, an enclave. And Ethiopia signed a peace, or some kind of a strategic agreement or alliance with this Somaliland that will enable them to get access to the Red Sea on one hand. The Egyptians doesn't like it because the Egyptians are in a great rivalry with Ethiopia because of what we call the Freedom Barrack that was built on the Blue Nile and denies water coming out to the northern part to the southern part of Egypt, and therefore they are very furious about Ethiopia, and they support the Somalis against this alliance, because the Somalis claim, of course, that this Somaliland is part of their territory and not some independent enclave. That's it. The second issue is the Iranians. The Iranians are supporting Sudan and supplying weapon systems to the current regime in Sudan, and in exchange they demanded the ability to build a naval port on the shores of what we call the Red Sea, on the western shore of the Red Sea, to control the Red Sea. The Sudanese wouldn't allow them to do that, and they have to settle with just assisting them and hoping for the best on the next phase. And the Russians, of course, are involved in the same area for the same reason, to get access to the Red Sea. And they also support, but they support the other part, and not the current regime in Sudan, but what we call the rivalries. And there is some conflict between them and between the Iranians, but nevertheless, Sudan is controlling the area. They have to make their own decisions, and that's the whole story.
Indeed. Well, the fact of the matter is, with regard to Sudan, since late October of 2023, more than 132,000 people were killed there, more than 3 times than the amount of people that were killed in Gaza, for that matter, where half of them, namely between 18 to 20,000, were members of the Islamist Hamas. But you don't hear every day any press statements coming out of Washington or any European capital, for that matter, about the devastation to that country. But General Kimet, I'd like to ask and maybe draw also from what General Sofin just mentioned with regard to Somaliland, and of course under that Puntland and Jubaland. We'll drive to the other side of the shore, and we're seeing there Ansar Allah, namely the terror group that is dominated by the Houthi tribe, continuing to pledge that they will continue to target freedom of navigation through the strategic Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. We're seeing them even threatening to expand those attacks not only to Israel and the various commercial vessels going through the strategic waterway, but also potentially to reignite hostilities vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and other U.S. partners in the region.
Yeah, I think that we're fully taking that into account. It's clear that the United States sees the issue of the Red Sea and the Houthis as something that goes well beyond the Middle East and that region, because of the consequences it would have and is having to some extent on world supply chains and inflation. Inflation is one of the biggest words that can be used to slur somebody in the United States right now, that any policy is inflationary. That's the best way to get more voters on your side. And even after the elections are over, I think the United States will remain committed in that area to avoid, if nothing else, the inflationary effects and the supply chain effects on international commerce.
Indeed. General Cooper-Wasser, if I look at the transition of Israel in recent years from EUCOM into the CENTCOM area of responsibility, coming under the American umbrella there, with General Michael Kurilla, of course, being on point in the leadership capacity of various operations throughout the region, it seems that U.S. allies and partners, including members of the Abraham Accords, are quite resolved when we're talking about the defensive architecture that was established as part of this treaty. Nevertheless, when we're talking about offensive activities, it seems like everybody are shying away but Israel. What can be done in order to potentially alter this strategic landscape?
Well, first of all, the strategic landscape has changed dramatically, and we have seen in the response to the Iranian attacks on Israel, that Israel and the United States were able to have the support of some local Middle Eastern countries in confronting the incoming attack, which is important. And I think that the fact that Jordan repeatedly speaks against the use of its airspace in the context of this war is also important. Not that anybody is really following their concerns. But that said, and I would say even more than that, what has been proven is that Israel is the strong horse that you would like to rely upon. Because while everybody else speaks about defense, Israel is also able and ready to use its force in order to bring about a change in the situation, not only in order to protect itself. Or in a strategic way, you can say that even offense is something part of protection, but it's still something of a different nature. And I think that this is extremely important in other contexts, but not only in the context of fighting directly against Iran, in the context of what's going to happen with the security of the Red Sea that you mentioned before. It's also an area where Israel and some of its neighbors can cooperate under the umbrella of the United States CENTCOM. So altogether, I think that there is a hope that in the future we shall see more than what we've seen until now. Much depends again on what are going to be the results of the elections in the United States. Under Harris, I would say that the prospects of such cooperation are lower. Under Trump, the prospects are higher.
Indeed. Well, a point that I think that is important to be made is that the Iranian stipulation, as was once again highlighted yesterday by the Iranian Foreign Ministry, is that any area in the Middle East where the United States' presence is the root cause for instability. Saying so, obviously, with a straight face is something that I give the Iranians a lot of credit for. Nevertheless, that is their way of doing it. On the other hand, we, of course, here in Israel view this quite to the contrary. But General Rosen, we don't have very much time left, and I still want to go around with a closing statement from each and every one of you. From an Israeli perspective, looking at the current challenges at hand, obviously Israel is already in a position to start to look for the day after the various hostilities in the region are going to come to a state of de-escalation. Nevertheless, you've stated a number of times that a state of de-escalation, as has been promoted by the Biden administration time and again, is not a strategy by itself. What should be pushed forward in order to establish a certain course to de-escalation?
You know, Jonathan, as hard as wars are, they are sometimes a necessity. Sometimes when wars break, the role, once you decide you have to go to war, you have to win this war and push as hard as you can until you get something from it. There's no other way to say this. In the last days, weeks, months of World War II, there was always the questions that were directed to the U.S. generals bombing the European cities, the German cities. And why do you need to continue to do that? Well, you need to continue to do that because everybody has to understand that the right side, which is Israel and the West, are the winning side. And the whole region, in order for us to really change the regional narrative, that's what is at stake. De-escalation is not a change of narrative. There's no way. This is the ongoing, very, very harmful narrative that has been going on in the region and served nothing vis-a-vis Israel and Iran and vis-a-vis Israel and Hezbollah or Hamas. Kicking the can, down the road just doesn't help doesn't help solve the problem. There's a real problem. The real problem is Iran. We need to come out of the U.S. elections because the United States is very important in the region. The United States has very important global interests in the Middle East, and the United States has to make some strategic decisions as to how it turns these interests into actual action. And Israel, under that, on the regional level, will need to turn the military superiority that it gained in the last few months into diplomatic advantages and to reshape the Middle East for the good of all the region, all the Lebanon, for Gaza's future, for Jordan, and all the states that are relevant to this war.
Thank you, General Rosen. Closing sentence and a half from each, and I will be very explicit on that. General Sofrin, we'll start with you.
Results of the election in the US, which are very critical to the Middle East and especially for Israel, and of course to see what Iran is planning.
General Kimmett.
There are very few things that haven't been argued about in the United States elections. One thing that has been argued and answered is that regardless of who comes in, whether it's the next 75 days of Biden or President Harris or President Trump, forget about the politics. The policy will be to remain in the Middle East, support our allies, and be an unquestioned defender of Israel.
General Cooper-Vassou.
Well, I think that looking into the future, one thing was proven in this last year. The value of Israel to the security of the United States and security of the West. And I think that that is a lesson that would be inculcated into the minds of whoever is going to be the next president.
General Rosen.
In the near term, I mean, the next 2 months or so, I think that we need to be looking out for how Iran will shape its new strategy, because it's definitely losing its few decades old strategy. And I think that will determine in so many ways how the region will move forward to, hopefully, with Israel's upper hand with the United States the few years to come.
General Dr. Sofrin, General Kimmett, General Cooper-Vassou, and General Rosen, thank you so very much for all of your insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at TV7Israelnews.com.